everybody, my name is Luke Marr and this is Hot Mode, and today on Hot Mode we are doing a first ever fashion book club by Hot Mode video. It's a Hot Mode book club situation, but I plan to do this monthly where we talk about a different fashion book. So many people have been asking me about them. They want to read, they're in quarantine, they have nothing to do. So I think it's important that we discuss. And the first book that we will be reading is the recently published autobiography by Andre Leon Talley titled The Chiffon Trenches. Now, this book for many is somewhat of a fashion tell-all about the sort of behind-the-scenes societal nature of the fashion industry in the 20th and early 21st century. Andre Leon Talley, for those that do not know, was a former creative director at Vogue and worked at other publications such as Ebony, Women's Wear Daily, W Magazine, Interview Magazine, and in reality has had an amazing career where he has created some of the most amazing, beautiful, stunning editorials that American Vogue has ever seen. And honestly, as soon as it was announced that Andre was putting out a autobiography where he would be talking about Anna Wintour, the editor-in-chief of American Vogue, I said, I'm in. Now, I mean, I've seen The Gospel According to Andre, which is a documentary about Andre's life growing up in the South, in Durham, North Carolina, and his trajectory to becoming one of the most important people in fashion. But as soon as the book came out, I was like, okay, I gotta read it as well. So honestly, let's talk about it. I think that I want to go through some really important things so that you know what's going to be in this book. I don't want this to be like a Luke talks about every single section of the book, but I want it to be like, these are the great things you're going to get to read about if you buy the book. And also the book will be in the description. There will be a link to it. And also, if you were wondering, some of you maybe, I'm wearing a Telfar shirt. It is one sleeved and it's meant to look like this. It's asymmetrical and normally I don't like it, but it's Telfar. And when Telfar tells me to do something asymmetrically, I'll do it. I am gonna quote some things throughout the book, but I'm gonna make sure that I give you the pleasure of being able to read all of the things Andre has to say. We did discuss this book on the Fashion Victims podcast that I do with my friend Darnell Jamal, and we sort of discussed how the book is very romantic, and it is beautifully written. Andre is an incredible soul, an incredible writer, and the way that he makes everybody, even people that have hurt him, sort of seem chic and elegant and sort of give them their dues. I don't know a writer like that. And so I think in that regard, it's not some snippy, bippy fashion book, something that I will probably write when I'm in my 70s. No, it's something that is really beautiful and paints a really gorgeous picture of the fashion industry when the fashion industry hasn't always been kind to the person painting the photo. The first page in the introduction actually says, and I quote, "I went through a series of voyages with Vogue magazine and its editor-in-chief, Anna Wintour, the most powerful person in fashion. I was a fixture, a force, and a fierce advocate of fashion and style." And Andre, in reality, talks about Anna Wintour quite a bit in this book. If you want to learn more about Andre and Anna's relationship throughout their entire lives or throughout the time that they knew each other, working together at Vogue, highly recommend. It sort of gives you a little bit of an insight into Anna Wintour's psyche, how she's sort of come to where she is as editor-in-chief of American Vogue and as artistic director of Condé Nast. And it sort of is a cautionary tale. Something that I want to really put out there is this book really shows you that in reality, getting into fashion and the fashion industry, it's not the picture that is painted. As much as I think everybody that loves fashion likes to paint this immaculate picture of it, it's not always that. And I think Andre does a really amazing job of showcasing that it's not all butterflies and rainbows. There's a lot of hard work and there's a lot of heartbreak and a lot of backstabbing, a lot of clawing to the top as well. He talks about his life growing up in Durham, North Carolina and the relationship he had with his mother, his father, and his grandmother, who was his primary caretaker. And he talks about the love of her. Eventually, Andre goes off to school. He plans to study in French, but eventually goes to Brown University because he's an Ivy League biznatch, and eventually shows up in New York and starts to work for the legendary former editor-in-chief of Vogue, Diana Vreeland, at the Costume Institute after she was taken out of Vogue. Diana Vreeland fought so hard so that Andre could get a job at Interview magazine, so I highly recommend you get into that, because in reality, some of you may not know, Andy Warhol was the founder of Interview magazine, and it talks a lot about Andre's relationship with Andy and the work that they sort of encountered together, so I highly recommend it. There are little cameos from people like Bianca Jagger, wife of Mick Jagger, and the person that is on my shirt when that woman is riding on that white horse into Studio 54. And there also is a cute little cameo from Azzedine Alaïa as well. It's like chock full of such amazing fashion, people that you wouldn't like ever, not that you wouldn't ever expect, but like it's amazing the stories that Andre can tell. I didn't know this, but Karl Lagerfeld and Andre Leon Talley were incredibly good friends, like incredibly good, and Andre details pretty much their entire relationship from start to end. So if you want to learn about the psyche of Karl Lagerfeld from Andre's perspective, also highly recommend. And if you're looking to find out more about the work ethic of Karl Lagerfeld, this book has it. Andre also goes very in depth about Yves Saint Laurent and the crew of society women that hung out with Yves Saint Laurent throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, into the early 2000s, and his death. And in reality, if you're looking to sort of understand the background of fashion, I think this book is really, really great. It gets into the sort of cliques and fights and feuds and frisons, as Andre says in the book, that sort of speculate around Paris's fashion culture throughout the 20th century, the later half of the 20th century. It's really, really amazing, and you see such amazing behind-the-scenes stories about how the greatest designers of Europe in the 20th century came to understand their inspiration, came to understand their muses as well. There's parts about Manolo Blahnik, the famous shoemaker, which there's a really great story in there that like everybody has to read. And Andre also gets into some really dark stuff about his own past and abuse that he faced as a child as well. So in that regard, it is this really nice mixture of Andre's personal life and how his personal life has also influenced his career. So in that regard, it's not just a fashion tell-all, it's sort of a really beautiful reflection of somebody who has worked in this industry for so long. I mean, also like the whole idea that Diana Ross and Andre Leon Talley are hanging out in this book, and like he talks about it, and there's this amazing photo which I will not show on screen because if you want to see the photo, buy the book. You can check that out as well. And also, if you didn't know, Karl Lagerfeld and Yves Saint Laurent kind of fought quite heavily. And I mean, maybe not heavily, but it was very Cold War-esque, and it was all about a man. Andre gets into that as well. So if you want to see two fashion greats, you know, duking it out, this is the book to read. Andre also talks a lot about the racism that he faced within the fashion industry. Many will probably say, oh, there's no racism in fashion. We love diversity. We're inclusive. That's not true. Andre details the experiences that he's had with multiple brands, multiple people, multiple publications of how they treated him. And in reality, it's incredibly important that as people that love fashion and people that want to know the history of the industry, we look at this part of the industry as well, especially now with what has been going on in America, has been going on in our country. As you all know, Black Lives Matter. And it's something that needs to be discussed, and I'm happy that Andre is one of the people that is comfortable enough to bring it to the table and to share those incredibly difficult conversations with us. Then there's a whole section on Paloma Picasso and her wedding. Now, Paloma Picasso was the daughter of Pablo Picasso. Andre also gets into how Paloma Picasso was Karl Lagerfeld and Yves Saint Laurent's biggest patrons, and the feud with fashion that is included in there as well. So that part is incredibly important, and I highly recommend it. There is a whole chapter about Miss Eunice Johnson, who ran Ebony magazine and the Ebony Fashion Fair, which was an amazing fashion fair that isn't really talked about in fashion, and I think we all probably know why. But the Ebony Fashion Fair, for those that don't know, was a way that Black Americans during the 50s, 60s, and parts of the 20th century, I can't name the exact timeline on it, but it was a way for them to actually see the haute couture and the fashion of Europe but have it actually brought to America and taken around to all different areas and parts of the United States. Miss Eunice Johnson is one of the most incredible pioneers for Black people in fashion, and you must know about her. So again, a great chapter to read in the book. There's a whole section on Karl's Chanel and how it came to be, and the drama that ensued with Karl's Chanel as well. And I'm gonna be honest, there was a lot of drama with Karl's Chanel. And honestly, there's a whole last part where Andre kind of insinuates that Anna Wintour, you know, really wanted to be friends with Andre because Andre was really good friends with Karl Lagerfeld. So for those of you that think, oh, Anna Wintour has curated these amazing relationships with brands like Chanel and Yves Saint Laurent and Oscar de la Renta, point to note, it was Andre. He was friends with all of them first. So if you want to learn something, this book is amazing. It literally is like this amazing bibliography from behind the scenes, from actually in the Chiffon trenches. Like, there's a reason it's called the Chiffon trenches. The trenches part is incredibly important, and the Chiffon part, well, it has to do with fashion. There is a whole part about Grace Mirabella, who was the former editor-in-chief of American Vogue before Anna Wintour, and the drama that ensued because of how Anna took over Vogue. It's incredibly good. And I've read a book about the sort of trajectory of Anna Wintour, and Andre's book seems to confirm quite a lot about it. There is an amazing section all about Anna's Vogue and how Andre essentially discusses, says he loves it, and admires all of the people that worked there, still work there, and the work that was taken place at American Vogue, which is really nice to see coming from the inside. There's a whole part, and there's quite a long part, about how Karl Lagerfeld seemed to treat people that were in his life, which I will let you read about because it's incredibly important if you want to understand Mr. Karl Lagerfeld. There's one part that discusses the somewhat abuse of Karl Lagerfeld in his childhood. There is a lot of stuff about Karl Lagerfeld and the relationship he had with his mother that is sort of not talked about all too often, or is sort of shirked off by Karl Lagerfeld, but Andre says, I think we both may have suffered abuse in our childhood, but Karl never completely defined his personal experiences to me. He did tell me that at a young age, his mother would strap him to his bed at night with leather restraints. It was done to prevent him from eating during the night. He also mentioned that when he was 8, his mother told him, "You look like an old dyke." She would also say, "You look like me, but not as good." There was a whole amazing section about Andre's work on shoots, like how he actually did editorials, and some of his iconic shoots, like Naomi Campbell playing Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. She didn't actually play Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, but there was an editorial based on Gone with the Wind, but reimagined the story of Gone with the Wind and had a Black woman as the lead character. So in a way, it's so incredible to see that Andre created such amazing content and it's not talked about. And Andre, in a way, to me, seems to have been wiped from the pages of Vogue in a way that differs than, you know, the Grace Coddingtons, the Tawny Goodmans, the Polly Mellons. Yeah, it's really sad to see because a lot of his work was incredibly important, detailed, meticulous, and turned fashion and fashion's narrative on its head and made it look at race and how race affected people and how race was a large part of the fashion conversation that was being ignored. There's a whole section about Andre's friendship with Lee Radziwill, who was the younger sister of Jackie Kennedy Onassis, which in reality was amazing because Lee Radziwill was a big fashion fan of people like Andre as well as the likes of Marc Jacobs too. So in that regard, you get such amazing stories from like all these different aspects of not only like fashion society, but like cultural standpoints. Like Lee Radziwill was a Bouvier and so was her sister Jackie, and it just goes into so many different cool corners that you have to read the goddamn book. There's even a section about Princess Diana. It's a short section, but it's a very good, poignant, interesting little moment that you're like, oh. So when you read it, you're gonna be like, wow, Luke was right. Is totally necessary. He talks about a lot of his work at SCAD, which is the Savannah College of Art and Design, which is amazing because he talks about his work doing retrospectives for people like Oscar de la Renta and how he got a lot of these society women that he met throughout his time at Vogue to contribute to the SCAD archives and to make SCAD a bit more fashion, as they would say. And he also discusses his love of caftans. Like, the man loved a caftan, revolutionized the caftan. It's highly recommended that you look at that part and get into the fact that people like Tom Ford and Nicolas Ghesquiere were, you know, loving makers of Andre's caftans when he would attend things like the Met Gala. And there are so many photos throughout this book that you're like, oh my god, I've never seen that. Like, I love this. Like, this is amazing. Like, for people that love Cher, there's a picture of him in Cher. For people that love Naomi, there's pictures of him in Naomi. There's a whole section about Renee Zellweger and how Andre and Renee became friends over a Birkin. Like, it's such a good book. It is. There's a whole section about the Obamas and Andre, you know, understanding, writing, discussing how important Michelle and Barack Obama are to not only fashion, but to the United States and the history of the United States. You also get an amazing insight into people like Rihanna and Beyonce and their time at things like the Met Gala. And you get to hear about some of their most iconic entrances and outfits as well. There's a part about Graydon Carter, who was the former editor-in-chief of Vanity Fair, and his relationship with Anna Wintour, but after watching the Jeffrey Epstein Filthy Rich documentary, I don't feel bad for Mr. Graydon whatsoever. There's a big part about Karl Lagerfeld's death and how his wishes before he passed were not exactly observed, and in reality, as somebody that was friends with Karl for what, probably 40 plus years, I think it's an incredibly important perspective that we don't often hear about. And there's an amazing whole chapter about Naomi and her love of Andre and her push for Andre to be seen as what he is, an amazing fashion lyricist, composer, somebody that is a journalist and a writer, and somebody that really can talk about fashion in such a beautiful way. There is a whole section about how Naomi Campbell was incredibly loving, beloving, and incredibly supportive of Andre, and how she pushed towards documentary The Gospel According to Andre, which you should watch, in the Lagos Fashion Week in Nigeria. And honestly, it's a really beautiful story, and you hear from Andre that while some people say that Naomi has this personality that isn't always the nicest and friendliest and loving, Andre says that even though that's a part of her isn't always discussed and talked about, is that she's an incredibly loving, caring person who will put herself out there for just about anybody, including Andre. And we needed that rewrite for Miss Naomi. There's also a part about Marc Jacobs, his work, his time at Vuitton as well, which I think you should definitely get into. And he talks a little bit about Condé Nast and the Met Gala, as well as a best dressed list. Honestly, I highly recommend you read The Gospel According to Andre. It is definitely something that is easy for just about anybody to pick up, and I highly recommend that when reading the book, you actually Google who all the people are. Like, Andre has this amazing little like dictionary of fashion people and fashion items and fashion collections that you should look into, Google, talk about, watch videos of, because it's gonna make you a little bit of a smarter fashion person. You're gonna know who a lot more people are, and a lot more people that were very influential behind the scenes of a lot of some of fashion's greatest designers and greatest collections. In reality, the Chiffon Trenches, a fashion tell-all that was deemed to be some sort of angry rewrite by a lot of really awful publications that tried to put anger on a black man, which we do not stand. Honestly, highly recommend you should read. It is affordable, it is a quick read, anybody can read it. It's a Hot Limo 10 out of 10, in my opinion. So with that, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you read the book. I will see you guys in the next video, and TTYL.